in the case to caption everything will be presented by Bill Bennett. He's a Media Solutions Account Manager for ENCO Systems. Bill joined ENCO early this year after working for a German broadcast manufacturer, Lawwell. Previously, he was a longtime remote broadcast engineer, consultant, and project manager. He was overseeing venue technical setup and operations for 5 Olympics and countless U.S. broadcasts for the NBA, NFL, NHL. He has also worked as an executive producer with New Media Business Development Executive at QVC and owned a laser display production company. We're pleased to have Bill here to talk about the importance of captioning to all of your media, and please welcome Bill.
Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming on this cold, blustery day, right? Or it's not really. So I have a tendency to rattle on. So do you have like 2 hours? Because no, that's bad for lunch. I know you guys are thinking about lunch already. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of give you a top-down discussion about captioning in its various forms and a bit of its history and a reason why to consider captioning content now, whether it's content you create or content that passes through your infrastructure or your venue, depending on your perspective, but mostly your broadcasters. So that'll be kind of most of the perspective here. And feel free to raise your hands, questions anytime during the thing here. So very casual about that. Real quick thing about, well, actually, I already told you that slide. ENCO Systems has been around for about 35 years, since the early 80s. And we've been in the automated captioning solutions business for about the last 10 years, since 2006 or so. We've been doing this for a while, and it's kind of neat to see the evolution of the technology and to see how it enables more things to be captioned automatically. And our background really is actually in robust systems designs and automation for factories in Detroit. But our founders were much more entertained by radio and broadcasting than it was assembly lines. So kind of moved into the radio side of things. So what are captions? I mean, they're kind of a larger ecosystem of assistive technologies for people who are hard of hearing in this case, although there are other related technologies for those who are hard of seeing as well. They're a way to make content more accessible to more people, and not even someone who's hard of hearing. As we'll kind of explore here, captions are beneficial to even those who are able hearing, and they're just pretty useful and also good from a business standpoint, marketing standpoint as well, and we'll get to that. A lot of reasons to caption. One, certainly regulatory. If your content is over the air, the FCC will want you to be captioning most of it. There's a lot of lawsuits coming nowadays, local and municipal, especially, and state lawsuits under the guise of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we'll talk about that stuff. But also creating content that is searchable. Video content whose internal captions can be searched is pretty powerful. Transcriptions are a side product of captioning, and we'll explore that. Loud places, really. Captions allow you to monetize your content in places where otherwise people may not be able to hear the audio that's in the material. And I kind of like to say it's kind of nice to be nice because when you caption your content, then more people are actually are enjoying what you're making or distributing or producing. So, and I'm just catching up. That's the happy face. The be nice part. So the National Association for the Deaf, they talk about approximately 48 million, nearly 1 out of 5 Americans are deaf or hard of hearing. And I know to a different degree, tinnitus or tinnitus is part of that. You may not be necessarily hard of hearing with that, but it creates sounds that may resonate with different sounds that you're hearing on broadcast content or video content. So that's kind of another hearing challenge. So that's a whole lot of people. And then about another 13.3 million Americans watch British drama, right? So we need to turn the captions on to hear what they're saying. So, with all due respect to that program, it's not always easy to hear. A little bit of history. The captioning started, ironically, we were talking about lawsuits, but actually captioning in a different form, transcriptions, began in the court systems a long time ago to create a permanent paper copy of the proceedings done by people who are stenographers. And that's really who's doing the captioning still today, humans using stenography devices, which are pretty cool machines. This is kind of how people used to do it. Who knew that one day what was being learned in these fields would be in our content that we watch on our phones and over the air and on video on demand and so forth. But it really has evolved. These earlier machines, pretty amazing devices. They actually supported multi-touch, which is, before multi-touch was cool. In captioning in generally, or stenography, the art, I will call it of stenography, is a lot more like recording phonetics, not actually word for word or letter for letter, but the phonetics of the words. And one inventor back in the early 1900s, Ward Stone, Ireland, has been given a lot of credit for developing some of the most, some of the groundbreaking early technology in stenography machines. And nowadays, of course, like so many things, it's got built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, SD cards to record the content, USB ports. What you're looking here at is a transcript of a phrase. Somebody says the top line is the name Dan, and then the bottom did Ann, right? So that's a transcription from a stenographer device. Pretty hard to read otherwise. So that's a real art. The problem is, as we'll discuss, there's fewer and fewer people able to do this. Here's kind of a history of its growth in television. Originally, back in the early 70s, the first captioning was done by open captions, which is literally manually done, somebody watching a video in the edit suite, pausing after a first set of words were said, pausing, typing it into a graphic, putting the graphic up, keying it up for that duration of those words, and then taking it back down and doing it again and again manually all throughout the video. That was the old school way of doing it. And also, because it's what's called open caption, it's burned in usually at the lower third of the graphic permanently. So if you ever hear the term open caption, that's a set of captions that aren't going to go away. They're burned down to the video. Closed captions technically is what's embedded in the signal, not part of it unless you enable on your viewing device. Open captions certainly have a real use to it, but closed captions are a little more friendly for how you might want to use them. In the mid-70s, the FCC allocated line 21 for the embedding of, that's vertical blanking line 21 in an Analogue NTSC video signal. If you're familiar with analog video, there's a lot of different lines above the visible fields, and those are kind of ancillary data lines that you could embed data for tagging of the content. But in this case, line 21 was reserved by the FCC for content, for data for the captioning content. So televisions and set-top boxes, once manufactured around that era, can start enabling, they can start decoding that and putting it on screen. Analog and basic, really, is how I like to describe it back then. And then with digital television, we started seeing much more customizable standards. Set-top boxes, over-the-top streaming devices, modern televisions can now read closed captioning embedded data. Of course, web browsers, smartphones, and these are graphical in nature. A lot of different kind of characters and character sets and colors can be embedded within that data, so that you could really control the overall experience. It's not just white text on a black background. The other thing is you can also, as a customer, as a viewer, change. And I manually, in this example, took some liberty with the viewer on a web browser and just changed the look of the font in the background. Of course, I'm realizing now I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and it looks like Michigan, blue and maize. That was accidental, believe me. But I'm just realizing it right now. It's like, whoops, wait a minute. Okay, so next one, red and gray. Anyway, but here's the thing is, you can really customize these to all kinds of different sizes of fonts and character sizes and fonts that can be much too large for the screen. So normally I don't think people set that up that big, but actually if you're really hard of vision, if you're challenged for vision at home, you would want that to make a really large font. Perhaps what this text says is more important to you than really what's on the screen, depending on what you're watching. So it's nice that you can customize it. The interesting thing about line 21, an Analogue NTSC, which is called EIA or CEA 608. There's two different parallel standards. Really low bit rate, 480 bits per second per line. Per field. and it's 32 characters. And so what you still even see today are the limits of 32 characters per line in closed captioning. That's kind of where that legacy comes from. But it's enough to get text through. So it's pretty neat what they did back there with analog TV at the time. The digital TV standard is 708, so EIA or CEA. Like we saw, it's pretty robust. You can do a lot of customizations with it. What's interesting is if you're watching streaming content at home with a set-top box, you notice that you're not turning the captions on at your TV. You're turning it on with the remote for like your Roku or your Apple TV device. That's because HDMI doesn't pass the closed captioning data, which is, so if it did, it would otherwise be able to pass right straight through to your television. So it's just something to kind of pay attention to, I guess, if you're ever connecting things up. HDMI and closed captioning don't get along. Any questions at this point? No? Okay, great. So there's kind of that's the explanation of where captioning went from legacy and analog to DTV and today. Now we're going to talk about the captioning processes and the technologies. We're humans versus automation, real time versus offline, and cloud versus on premises. And some of the stuff, there's some gray area back and forth, and we'll kind of like to talk through that. Some of the benefits of humans, of course, are that they really do understand the language and the words being said. They can hear through background noise, of course, because they're able to kind of tune their ears and listening through the sound of a jackhammer or cars going by or background music. A human is best gifted at doing that. Interesting point, they can, if there's a few people conversing, maybe arguing in a video, on a video session, like a news piece or something, because they never argue in news, right? So the captioner has to make a conscious decision, who am I going to caption? And is it this person's voice or is it this person's voice? So that's kind of a challenge, but they have to make a choice and do that, and try to caption who they can. Because they're humans, they're more expensive. And there's very few humans that could really do this earlier stenography stuff that we've talked about. So it's a bit of a finite resource. Humans, of course, get fatigued. They can only caption for so long before they need a break. And you do need to schedule them. You need to have actual timing set aside for a human to be in a captioning location, whether it's a chair or an office or something, and be in that chair for that duration. One of the challenges also with captioning by humans is they don't always do word for word. They very often do the synopsis of this phrase or the sentence that was said, kind of the gist of it, but not the actual word for word. And those who are hard of hearing are saying, well, they don't really like that because that's a person's opinion of a gist of something. It's not the exact words as spoken. So with an automated technology, you'd actually get the words themselves, not the gist. So ASR, or automatic speech recognition, versus a human, it's certainly, it's technology, it's automated, so it's generally lower cost. One neat little side thing is, well, a human can still hit the wrong key and create a typo. The computer won't do a typo. It's only going to put out words that are based in or built into its system, into its lexicon, its dictionary. So you won't get a typo, which is nice. The ASR system can learn unique words. You can feed it words of. Funny, this is a bit of a digression, but actually up in Michigan, there's this town in the Upper Peninsula called Sault Ste. Marie. It's 3 words. Salt is how you looks like you or SAULT is how you spell Sioux. If you set it as those 3 words to a captioning system without training it, it would just type in probably the worst person's name, Sue, and then Saint, and then Marie. Some technologies, ours particularly has this ability to add what are called 3-word pairs, where you can add it. If it hears the word Sue, then Saint, then Marie, then tell it to spell the word Sue as salt, S-A-U-L-T, and then it will pass that through properly. So not sure if that makes sense, but it's kind of it's like great with a person's name too. Let's say that Chris Schultz is an anchor. Well, you say, is it Chris with a K or is it Chris with C-H-R-I-S? You can train it that when it hears the words Chris Schultz, it knows this use the K and spell it with a K, for example. So with technology, you can kind of do that. Of course, with humans, you can train them to do that as well. But the technology is catching up there. Of course, the automatic speech recognition can run 24/7. There's no reason to stop it. The thing about concurrent speakers I mentioned, if people are kind of going back and forth or stepping on each other, the technology will be unable to choose who to listen to necessarily. It could over time be trained to listen to a particular voice. That's interesting, but then when does it start listening to the other voice again? So automation is an interesting kind of world too. Different speech engines have different levels of success with background noise and music, and so those are things to consider. How well does the technology you're looking at respond to the background noise? And of course, the science is emerging pretty fast. Different base technologies are, or different captioning systems are based on different technologies. Ours and others are neural network in their learning design and look at statistical language models and do get better with time because they are fed in development in a laboratory with the results and are coached, okay, you did this right, this not so good, and they do get better. So that's kind of a neat aspect of the technology. Automatic speech recognition can also be used in both real-time or file-based and in the cloud or fully on premises without cloud connectivity. We're seeing in the industry in general, the accuracy is in the mid-90s, and boy, just a couple years ago it wasn't that good, so it's getting better really fast. Any questions? Okay. Real-time versus offline. Yeah, real-time there's a delay of about 3 to seconds, maybe up to 5. We see around 3 to 4 seconds. That's when the technology is evaluating the words and trying to figure out how many words you can put on 32 characters before it has to do a carriage return to the next line. So you're always going to get a little bit of that delay. But also, mind you, there's a similar thing with a human. And as they're listening to the feed and captioning and typing it in, and then that data is fed back into the uplink feed for transmission. So there are delays in the process, but only a few seconds. Live is live, whether it's human or technical. If there were any errors or typos, you can't go back. They're out there. Whereas if you go offline, you add files into a hopper or a watch folder, and the system will transcribe them. Then you look at these transcriptions, and you look at the offline video clips, and you compare and you match. And if there's a typo or a missing word, you can type it in there manually, and then marry the files back up the video and the transcript, and have a really perfectly accurate transcription. The benefits of doing something offline, of course. And live or real time can also be done cloud or on premises. Let's see. Yeah, so I think I covered all that there. I just don't want to waste too much of your time repeating the same thing too much. Cloud, by the way, is very popular with offline because cloud denotes a non-current or non-live need to have your material captioned offline. So a lot of folks will take a lot of their files and content and throw them out to an offline cloud-based service and then wait a few days or a few hours at least to get it back. That doesn't necessarily work if you have a closer turnaround window than that. That's why on-premises still has its advantages too. So and kind of going to the cloud versus on-premises. Cloud-based it's kind of interesting because the way captioners work nowadays, humans, they're sort of semi-cloud anyway because they're usually not in an uplink facility or a broadcast facility. They're at their home doing it. Captioning these days with technology is very easily done by someone in their own house. You don't have a bank of stenographers watching video screens with earpieces and a keyboard in front of them. That's not really how it's done now. But if you do have someone there for captioning remotely, their connection could go down. I have heard stories, just a couple weeks ago I heard one where someone was literally not at their home when they were supposed to be captioning. They were reserved for that certain time for a certain network and they were not there. So, maybe they went out for a little bit grab a cup of coffee, come home, and it was snowing out or something. And all of a sudden your captioning person isn't there. So, yeah, what interesting, the last part is we talk about your content never leaves the building. For broadcasters, that's kind of the antithesis of what you want. You want your stuff out of the building. But we work with certain government and classified type customers that actually do have content that cannot leave their building, which is why you may want to have, if you're a commercial or AV provider or integrator, you may want a on-premises only solution for that because of the classified or sensitive nature. Actually, even automakers are like that. They don't want to take their design ideas and put it out in the cloud for captioning when they can just do it within their building. So on-premises also, no connection to lose. And yeah, bolted in the rack, it's pretty much going to stay there. The interesting thing about the way humans are doing it traditionally is you have a facility. It's pretty complicated. You have a facility, right? A broadcast station goes over the air. This captioner is watching it. They're probably not watching a live stream because there'd be delays in the codecs. They're probably watching it either over the air, or if they're out of market, maybe over satellite. Or they sometimes can also just do it with a direct telephone connection and just listening to the audio and not watch the video. Then they type it into their keyboard, and then they have another connection either through the web or through ISDN, if that's still around in some places, back to the broadcast television facility where it's then integrated with the uplink signal and then sent over the air. So there is a bit of a process there, a bit of complexity. That's what kind of a human caption model would look like. What's neat is if you have an on-premises solution, it's a whole lot simpler. You know, the audio from the production comes through the captioning system, and it's embedded into an SDI feed, and just goes along to uplink, and it's all within one building. So that's a benefit for both automation and for on-premises right there, a simpler kind of environment. So why caption, right? Why are we doing this? Kind of alluded to it earlier. But yeah, FCC regulations for over-the-air. The FCC does not regulate what's not over the air, though. So there's, in that case, be aware of the Americans with Disabilities Act, again, in suits that are brought to bear under those, under the auspices of the Act. Other nice thing about this is your content becomes searchable within your own. If you have like a logging or compliance system at the station, or Google itself, if you now start doing searches, in Google you'll find that they start showing index points to videos where the captioning is for certain videos that are there, and they're growing that capability. So your content in the words within your captioned content can be found within your videos on Google over time. So that's pretty neat. And the other thing is, once you start captioning, you're creating a data stream that can then be sent to translation engines and do actual real-time translations to other languages, which we can kind of touch on. But yeah, broadcasters need to care about it, clearly, and radio, too. There's neat technologies out there now that take the captioning or the data from a radio microphone or an announcer and embed that data into an offline cloud environment such that you can get a word cloud on a web browser and see the words within that recording and click on those words, and the virtual playhead on a timeline will jump to that and start playing that. So it's kind of neat. You just see the whole audio sample like an hour program, and then a word cloud beneath that of all the words that are unique, that are kind of interesting, that you can click on, and it just jumps to that. That's kind of a neat technology. Venue owners for sports and theaters and airports and restaurants also are subject of lawsuits, and under, again, mostly ADA requirements. So yeah, their antennas are up. The interesting thing, so the ADA would again, check out the Act. It came out way back in 1990, and it really is. It's kind of long to read, but it's also very insightful. It's pretty simple. The National Association for the Deaf, NAD.org, I recommend looking at their website too if you have any concerns about your content, whether it's stuff that you publish or transport through your system, or if you have a venue. You know, we'll get to this, but there are even more requirements that displays of any sort in any location have captions. That might even include the lobby in your broadcast offices. Your lobby may have a few TVs on. Depending on how one reads the ADA, or Americans with Disability Act, you may find that you should be captioning even those screens as well. Because if somebody's waiting in your lobby and is hard of hearing and is looking at your content, they may not hear well enough and therefore not be enjoying it fully. So, you know, it's like everything these days, check with your attorneys, right? The FCC regulations, again, they're mostly related to over the air, but you'll see in a minute the National Association for the Deaf really kind of are very similar. I won't quite read all of that just from a standpoint of lack of time right now, but this is kind of the basis that the ADA also is modeled under or after. The National Association for the Deaf really wants to see all pre-recorded and live content 24/7 captioned, including emergency broadcasts, whether those can be done by, you know, they don't seem to have a preference. real-time, done by either humans or technology, automation, from what I've been able to read. And in all public places, all displays that have video, they would like to see captions. So, that's a lot. Some examples of lawsuits that have been out there. There are many. Just Google it. MIT a few years ago got cited for lacking captions for their lectures and courses. I know of K through 12 and universities in the U.S. who have taken down all of their non-captioned video content as a safety precaution, so that only the content they have up there is captioned right now, and then they are offline, slowly going through all these clips and adding captions to them via automation, and then putting them back online once they're captioned. So, which is sad, because those are, especially in academic environments, places that want to share their content. So yeah, it's kind of a challenge. NPR was sued as well to provide more content on their website, and you would think that they might be one of the more progressive folks out there to think about these things. But I mean, it's a lot of time and money developing ways to make content available to more people. It's accessibility is not a cheap business. Netflix was sued as well because of content that originally was not captioned, some content there. Now it all is. This gentleman, Philip Sullivan, has filed over 100 suits based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I'm suspecting that he's going to continue doing that. This is just something from January of this year, suing Consumer Reports, which is interesting. So they're out there, people are looking at your content. Yeah, interesting new kind of thing we're also seeing here now is local ordinances, municipalities. I do happen to live in Michigan, and I noticed a few weeks ago that there was a restaurant that had some TVs with the same content. Some had them captioned, some didn't. And technically that restaurant was in violation of the local regulation right there by just not having the captions turned on that one TV. Out west, we're seeing Seattle, in Portland and San Francisco, stadiums now are starting to come into this as well. So more and more stadiums you go to, that you should be seeing or expect to be seeing captions from the PA system announcer. Depending on the venue, if there are newer facilities, they may have dedicated locations for these text windows of captions, or they may just embed them on the main video feed within the venue. But you're seeing that too. And of course, the technology is kind of neat that you can also stream captions just via HTML to a smartphone. So you may not necessarily have to put it on the main screen, as well as make it available to someone on a mobile device. I'm not sure how the attorneys would read that is a good idea or not, but certainly technically possible. Again, as I mentioned, captioning your content also creates searchable content. Google, even before mining the captioning data within the recordings or video recordings, have been doing OCR for years, reading any kind of graphics that come up on the screen and reading that in an automated fashion and putting that into some sort of metadata searchable file to go along with the video. But now that they can mine the actual caption data, that's a gold mine there. And again, logging and compliance videos. More broadcasters are using software to just constantly record all of their content, usually at least over-the-air content. And in that would be your captioning data. So those videos should have your captioning data that you can search for depending on the kind of software you've got. One kind of side point about captions, we were talking about how it's useful for those who are hard of hearing, but also what if you're in a loud kind of sports bar environment and there's a whole bunch of TVs, like you go to Buffalo Wild Wings on a game day, Saturday or Sunday, and there's how many different games that are on? They'll probably have only one game on over the PA system at any one time. But if there are captions on all these other monitors, as a patron, you can just look and you're having a bite of lunch with somebody, and there's a caption of what your other team is doing. That it's just kind of it's not just as a requirement, it's a nice thing to have. But which is interesting is, I'm going to do a slight aside here, but your advertising folks might also like to know that they could maybe, depending on, or your commentators, they're not just saying text and spewing out text off teleprompter, they're also saying stuff that goes into caption files. So keep that in mind, that you're feeding it later downstream a searchable database. So it's, your content is more broadly accessible that way as you're reading your teleprompter and then just recording it into a searchable caption file. It's kind of interesting. You can find it in a lot of different ways. Oh yeah, and retail signage. I mean, I experienced this walking by a storefront, and they had a video display out front, and of course you can't hear that, you're outside, but the captions caught my attention, just the words on the screen. Not for a few seconds, but still enough to kind of grab my attention. So, if someone has some captions on their content that you can't otherwise hear, it makes it more interesting and adds more value to it therefore. And definitely at airports, a lot of digital signage there already. We're finding, we're talking to customers now that have requirements for factory floors, where there are these large points of display within the factories of digital signage of things going on, or short little videos, stuff like that. Digital signage alone, just simple text, you don't need to caption that, but you do if there is some kind of video rolling that might be saying something that's interesting to the people on the factory floor or walking by in the hallways. Corporations as well, in large common spaces where people mingle. So it's just another form of messaging. It's more visual. Yeah, this is just a kind of a side of like, this was completed, last year, 2 years ago? Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. 2,000 televisions around the concourse of the place. If, depending on the rules, the regulations in Atlanta, depending on how they're written, they may require, if there's any kind of dialogue going on the video of the content of those 2,000 screens, every one of those may have to be captioned. It really depends on the content. Of course, if some of them are just used for digital signage, then not so much, but there's a lot more video screens out there now. And we talked about translations. Again, once you create the digital stream of information from your captioning system, whether it's a human or an automated system, then it's much easier to throw that data into a translation engine. We happen to have a product that can do, I think, 46 different languages, translations between one and another. And there's a lot of other neat products out there in the market as well. Which is kind of an interesting thought. If you've got a large multinational environment where you maybe have one speaker in English and you've got 5 or 6 other languages represented in the audience, you could translate in real time from that one English language to all these other languages at the same time, whether it's on the same display or different displays or what have you, or even just the different smartphone web pages that the different people from different languages can look at a different URL on their phone and get real life translations of the English speaker up front. And of course, it doesn't have to start with English. It could be from one language to, how many other languages. But it's real, and of course, all of this is stuff that can be fed into transcripts and again, added as metadata into your video for later search purposes. I just had to throw this slide in. I was looking for images, and I thought, this is a funny one. So it has nothing to do with captioning, but anybody notice? Exactly, right. Right, a little 1/8-inch tip ring sleeve trying to go to an RCA jack. It's just not going to work. It's yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. So I just had to. That was my attempt at humor today. One of the other side attributes of captions is that you get these transcript files, which are text files in different types of formats that are compatible with different types of editing applications. Now, here in this case, Premiere, Dissolve, DaVinci Resolve, and Final Cut Pro are examples, popular examples, but there's a lot of other desktop editing applications out there. And generally, the way they work is you can create a transcript from your captioning, whether it's live or file-based offline, and then you take that transcript and you load it into the editor, and it marries it back up with the video content that it just was created from. So that's how you add captions to video that doesn't have captions. You can also do this with YouTube. If you've got a 5-minute clip, you spit it through a caption engine, and you've got your transcript from that, then you can upload this transcript file to YouTube, and it will marry it back up dynamically with the video whenever it's played in somebody's browser. So there's kind of a couple of ways to use transcript files. not to get too into the weeds here, but this is a few different examples, at least in our ecosystem, what our output files look like and how they're time-coded with the text that happened at that exact moment in time. As you can see, that's just a straight text file. This format is a SRT file, which is a little bit different format that a video editing application wants to see. This is yet a different one called VTT. It's again got the time code in and out points and the words that were associated with that time. This one has a little more of a XML kind of look to it. It's a SMI format. This one I've never been able to figure out, right? Hexadecimal. This one it's an SCC file format. So there's some editor out there, some software that likes to see hex. And maybe there's somebody in here who can read this, but that's not me. And then once in a while you get transcripts that somewhat has to be modified by the human being, and then it might look like that. But that's the redacted transcripts. And now transcripts. The other cool thing is you can create permanent records of content and have it in a physical document, even paper if you needed to print that. So another nice thing about using humans and automated speech-to-text is that you're not just encoding and adding captions to your video, you're adding or creating these electronic files of the captions, which again, if you throw that into a file system, you can go search for that, then you're searching across all these text documents, and they can at least find, therefore, the names of the clips and the time points within those clips where those words occurred. So just kind of nice to have. There's a few related things to captioning and speech-to-text. There's something called CART, Communication Access Real-Time Translation. That's not really for broadcast. That's usually in-room. It's usually a person in a room captioning on a stenographer device to a display. There are other products out there. We happen to have one that does that to like HTML through an automated thing, engine, so that it's the equivalent. That as I'm talking, you would see the words I'm saying on a separate screen. The second audio program is that is an NTSC analog kind of holdover you may have heard about. Audio descriptive or description, video description services are a little more interesting. That's a human doing a narration of what is on the video that helps those who are blind or hard of vision understand what's taking place in the video. That's usually, I think, a human, though, that's doing it and just talking on another audio channel, or maybe on the main program audio channel. Of course, we've also heard of subtitles a lot. That's sort of captions, but it can also be, and you see it on DVDs and streaming, and DTV format supports that. It can be captions, it can be translations, it's secondary audio programs in different languages. So subtitles is more of a broad catch-all term. The interesting thing is now that we're creating these captions, right? What's it mean down the road? Because of computers and neural networks and AI, it's easier for technology to kind of extract the meanings of conversations. It's easier to, of course, mine into these large pools of captioned data and pull out meaning from it, therefore. And that's also what sentiment analysis is kind of like. And of course, computers can do that really fast. So maybe you throw in an hour-long program or interview, and you tell the software, okay, tell me what's the gist, what was the meaning of this hour-long interview? And by just going through not even just the voice, but just the transcript, the software is getting smarter at telling you kind of what the gist was of that. It's. I don't think we can fully understand what it will bring one day once we have all of our voice captioned into text files as well. This was something that was interesting. An MIT spin-out company called Cogito created this application for call centers. And these little icons, not literally these are just emojis, but icons like these would show up in a call center at the computer workstation of someone taking your call, if you were to call in about something. And the software would be using some sort of heuristics to tell you whether the caller is happy or not, or getting frustrated or not, or angry, or what have you. And of course, you should be able to tell this as just the listener, right, at the other end of the phone. But this kind of backs it up, and it's been, the pitch and emotional factors and the pacing, the clarity of the words, how well are they pronouncing words. These are all things that software can understand. and understand what you are thinking or feeling at that time. Not thinking, but what you're kind of feeling. So again, there's a lot of power in our speech that way. And so pretty interesting stuff. So careful what you say. You're being captioned. And no, I don't have a USB stick with a caption of the presentation. I'm sorry. But there is a recording of it. So yeah, any questions? Wow. It was that exciting. Okay, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.